So, Matt, we found the news out, 48 hours ago, that the signed exclusivity agreement that was scheduled with MSP is no more. Up to 150 million pounds set to be invested, and 25% of a stake in Everton. Um, just give us an outline of what that whole situation is and how it come about, if you can.
Yeah, sure. Well, as your listeners will know, ever since really Russia invaded Ukraine about 18 months ago, um, Farhad Moshiri has been looking for help. It's been financial help, Everton. There's a few reasons for this. I won't need to explain to your listeners that Farhad Moshiri's business partner, Alisher Usmanov, has been very helpful to the club over the years. Alisher Usmanov has been added to the UK sanctions list. He's an Uzbek-born oligarch, very, very wealthy man, but has clear connections to the Kremlin. So he's on the sanctions list, which means all of the sponsorships that Everton had with Usmanov-linked clubs had to be cancelled, basically. So that was a significant financial hit right there. Usmanov was also in line to provide the naming rights partner at Finch Farm. Finch Farm. He already does that at Bramley Moor Dock, and that's a significant part of the funding plan for the building of the stadium. And then I think the third part is that Moshiri's wealth has also been heavily impacted. He has lots of assets in Russia. That's effectively all been frozen. So it was a bit of a triple whammy. I think even prior to that sort of sudden external shock, again, I don't need to sort of say too much about this, but Everton have been losing money for years.
Yeah.
Moshiri himself, since 2016, he's in for about 750 million at Everton. He's basically funded the stadium build himself up to this point. The budget has now gone from 500 to 760 million, and I think it might go a bit higher. He has pretty much paid for the first 400 million of that. So he was already looking for help with the stadium, a kind of funding plan with the stadium, combination of long-term debt, maybe an external partner there to help with that. So a lot of these things were happening. Some of these things were happening anyway, and then there was a sort of sudden dramatic change that made it really, really important that he got some money in. Everton's right up against it. There's this ongoing independent investigation, Premier League investigation into the financial fair play situation, 21-22, and we're sort of expecting a verdict on that in the coming months. And then you've had these sort of relegation battles as well. So there's a lot going on. So he's been looking for a while, and last year we had Kaminsky, didn't we? A Polish-born American property guy who was going to buy a stake in the club. That dragged on for most of last summer. And then there have been some various other bits and bobs going on in the background. And then this year, it's sort of come down to one of two US sports investment groups that were most likely to take a minority stake and or lend more money to do the stadium. And they are MSP Sports Capital, who are New York based. They've got some stakes in small European football teams, got some shares in the Phoenix Suns and F1's McLaren. They're a pretty reputable group. They've been around for a while, set up by a sports agent called Jeff Morad and a sports and technology property investor called James Najafi. And then the other group is 777 Partners, who are based in Miami, slightly newer. Started off in something called structured finance, which is sort of like kind of insurance settlements, and has got into airplane leasing and property, but in the last couple of years, very, very aggressively into football in terms of kind of this multi-club ownership group model idea where you piece together a kind of little mini empire of football clubs, and they've got stakes in Genoa, Hertha Berlin, Sevilla, Vasco da Gama, Melbourne. I'm probably missing a couple there as well. So they've Standard Liège. So they own Red Star in Paris. So they've grown fast. They haven't actually sort of shown much evidence that they're going to sort of make some sense of their portfolio of clubs yet. But we'll give them a bit more time there. So those two groups have been kind of dropping position. As of about May, MSP appear to have won. They signed an exclusivity agreement with Mashiri for a plan, as you outlined in your question, to invest up to 150 million pounds in the entire, if you like, enterprise. But 100 million of that would really be sort of targeted at the stadium development company, so to fill that 360 million pound gap that I mentioned before in the funding plan for Bramley Moor. And then about 50 million would go to Everton Football Club for just for cash flow, because Everton has cash flow issues, and that would be convertible debt. So basically a loan with warrants that you then activate and you take shares, and they would end up with about 25% of the club, there or thereabouts. So that was the plan, and it was structured that way because with the stadium, he's going to do the rest of it with the type of long-term debt, long-term cheap debt that Tottenham, for example, built their stadium with. But to sort of trigger that, to secure that, those lenders, and he's commissioned JP Morgan and a Japanese bank, MUFG, to do that work, wanted more security, wanted more certainty. They wanted somebody else with skin in the game, i.e. equity in the company, to do some of it to lower their risk profile. So that's why the MSP money into the Stadium Co. with shares was important. It was to sort of secure that whole funding package for the stadium. And then the other bit of what MSP were meant to be bringing to the table, and again, this is something I'm sure you've done umpteen times with your podcast, is new energy, new ideas to the board, new blood, and really kind of a sort of the beginning of a route map for the future of the club. You know, where's it really going? Because it's been, obviously drifting. I haven't got skin in this game. I'm neutral here, but most outside observers would say that Everton appears to have been drifting for a long, long time, and the last few years in particular. So MSP were going to get seats on the board. A little bit of US know-how. They're always very full of themselves about that. But there's no doubt that they certainly would have brought connections to North American money, which I think would be helpful. And know-how around the stadium, I think, is probably a fair point. They certainly would have some good ideas around utilising what is still going to be, if all goes well, a pretty amazing asset for the club, hopefully. So that was the plan. And long story short, it's collapsed. It's collapsed because Everton's largest existing lender, creditor, Rights and Media Funding, Cheshire-based, slightly opaque lender. They sources his money from the Bahamas and the Isle of Man. Long-standing relationship with Everton, going back to the Vibrat days, and Robert Earle, who founded Planet Hollywood, and
very infamous people.
Well, yeah, and he's a former director of Everton, and so they, long-standing lender. Everton's lending facility with them is now up to 200 million. Doesn't mean they've borrowed all of 200 million, but they can. They extended it in the last year. Well, and this is not unusual, by the way, what I'm about to explain here. They have what's called a negative pledge clause, and if you think about it in really simple terms, you buy your house with a mortgage, and then a few years later, that mortgage with a bank or a building society. Then a few years later, you need a bit more money, so you remortgage it with another bank or building society, but you don't tell the other lot, and you sort of basically try and remortgage it twice. How do you think the first bank is going to feel? They're going to be a bit miffed, aren't they? And that's why you can't do it, because they have security on your house, and in this Everton case, Rights Media have security over various Everton assets. So they are well within their rights to say, one, you're diluting my security, you're sort of increasing my exposure to risk here.
Yeah.
No. So that's part of it. But I sort of, since making calls on this, and I've been making calls on this for most of this week, I've learned that I don't think that's their only objection. I think Rights and Media are very concerned about Everton's position, and therefore very concerned about their own position, because they are on the hook for, best part of £200 million. And they didn't think the MSP deal was good enough. They didn't think MSP were bringing enough cash to the table. They probably thought MSP were getting too many shares for the amount of cash they were bringing as well. But fundamentally, they think Everton needs more money, a bigger transfusion. So that's why it's collapsed. And I suppose the only kind of bit of positivity here is that MSP have continued, if you like, with one part of the plan. They are now lending money to the Stadium Development Company. So that 100 million that was going to go for that bit of the plan is going. It's just going as a straightforward loan. So that's more debt, just more, there's no equity attached to that. So it's just more debt. They're lending 100 million. And I actually suspect that at least 40 million of that will be set aside, ring fence. I don't think it's going to happen very, very quickly, to repay some money that flowed in May from Andy Bell, who's a lifelong Evertonian, very successful British businessman. He set up AJ Bell, the stockbroking platform, in May. And we could see this at Company's House with a charge, basically a mortgage that was placed on the Stadium Development Company. He put in £40 million. Now, that £40 million was supposed to be kind of a bridging loan to keep Lang O'Rourke, the people who are building Bramley-Moore, keep them happy, and that he would then be repaid out of the MSP money. So that, I know that there's a lot of numbers there and lots of money going backwards and forwards, but I suppose the important thing for your listeners to get is there was this plan. It was money for the stadium, some cash for the club. It came with shares. They were going to get seats on the board. That's off because an existing lender said no, understandably so. Although you could ask questions about why they didn't work that out before. And now a loan is just gone to the Stadium Development Company. And Everton are slightly back. Well, Everton and Mashiri are back to square one in terms of their bigger problem. How do we fund this club and this stadium going forward?
How much of a risk is with that? I.e., you mentioned 350 million that we still need to get the stadium essentially finished. What position would fans will be really nervous about this? What's the likelihood of that still not going ahead? Because it's quite ambiguous that you hear as your average fan that, oh, well, look at the stadium now. It looks really good. It looks like seats are about to go in soon. Is there a risk that this doesn't go ahead and it ends up as it's not going to happen?
Yeah, look, there's a risk. Yeah, I mean, anyone telling you otherwise is fibbing. How big's the risk, right? So that's the real issue here. I think it's very unlikely now that the stadium doesn't happen, right? Doesn't finish, because it has to. Because as you just said, it's so far along. It is plan A, B, C, D, and E for Everton and Mashiri. He's so much of the sort of heavy lifting in terms of the actual heavy lifting and the money is done. So the bit that's remaining then is that last bit that was there was a plan. It was all set out in May. MSP money arrives, they get shares, therefore they are actual partners in this. That would then give the market, the markets, the security they want. I was led to believe that JP Morgan and this bank that used to be called Mitsubishi had effectively secured that money. It was sort of good to go. They could have done it really, really long term, kind of like a sort of 25-year thing. But I think Mashiri was leaning towards, just because of the way the interest rates are sort of going, and he was thinking, well, they'll fall, and well, then I'll remortgage in a few years' time. He was just going to get it as a 5-year construction loan. That all made sense. So look, yes, there is some doubt now about that. The 100 million has gone in from MSP as a loan. So now the question is, okay, are JP Morgan and their clients and Mitsubishi and their clients happy with that? Is that money still going to come? Is it still going to come on the same terms, same interest rates? We don't know. So, watch this space. Does he have to sort of restructure that plan? Does that now have to be another straightforward loan with higher costs? So that is a live topic. If all starts to really go wrong, that stadium is still an asset. It's still an asset, right? And it's sort of worth, its value as a business is still positive, right? It's still more value than the amount of money spent on it, particularly as Moshiri is effectively going to have to write off that 400 million he's spent. So that is a little slither of good news. It's not great news, obviously, because it would mean Everton, instead of owning this wonderful thing that they've been looking forward to for years and years, and securing the future going forward, would then just become a renter of their stadium, and that's obviously not ideal if they have to sell the stadium to a third party. But that at least is an option that Moshiri has. So to answer your question, does the stadium happen? I think the stadium does happen because it's a valuable enough asset and someone will buy it and therefore finish it.
Yeah.
Right. So what does it mean for the football club? Well, this is where we get into, I'm sort of throwing my hands up in the air here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because he spent 18 months looking for help. I know he's denied it for a long, long time, but I'm telling you, he's been looking for help. I'm telling you that he is unable to fund Everton as a sort of going concern at the moment.
He just on his own. He couldn't do it on his own.
No, he's not. Because he is so constrained elsewhere. The club still runs at a loss, so still requires money from an owner, from investors. The situation has improved, of course. You're basically under special measures with the Premier League.
Yeah. But that's to come rest this year, isn't it? The issues that lie with that.
So, and we've seen sales of players already. Could there be some more of those? Maybe, but look how late we are in the window. So he's running out of road a bit. He's running out of options. So this MSP deal not happening is there's no way of sort of dressing up. It's a blow. So, if he tells me and all the signals are, it's okay, there are other options, other conversations. Yeah, I know. That's how I picked up on this story.
Yeah.
I went away, I thought this was sort of a done deal in May, June. MSP announced the security to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the States. We've raised the money. I was hearing things about then we saw the board changes, an interim board. All the kind of choreography appeared to be going in the right direction. I and lots of other sports business journalists go off on holiday. I come back from holiday and I'm hearing Everton are being shopped around again. I'm thinking, well, hold on a minute. That deal was done. How on earth is 777 and other North American and Asian groups being shown what are called decks, which are just prospectuses, sort of sales details. How is this happening? Well, then we learn right this week. So something has to happen. It has to happen fast. It sounds like 777 are back in the picture. Did they ever really go? But they certainly were out while MSP had an exclusivity arrangement. Let's see. 777 had all of 2023 to close that deal, if they could. It has some issues elsewhere in its group, so we will see. And if it's not them, it has to be someone else, and it has to be, a big number. Do they get shares? Is it pretty much the same deal as MSP? I don't know. I suspect it sort of has to be, or certainly similar.
Yeah.
But it genuinely has to happen quite quickly.
Just one final question on this. Would Moshiri not be interested in actually selling the club?
Well, it's a good question. He, I think, feels that he has put so much of his wealth into the club and the stadium,
Mm.
that if he can at all avoid that, he doesn't want, he seems to think that he can sort of just get through this. If he can get through this, there is a sort of, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But we're almost getting to the point now where, selling the club, he's going to be selling it at a massive, what is Everton worth? This is where you get into sort of, real interesting questions about where Everton is now, how you benchmark it, which sort of club are you benchmarking it against, how much debt is there?
Would that not go at the initially what you said, in 150 million coming in from MSP for 25% of the club, therefore that would make it what, 600 million, something like that?
Yeah, it would, plus the stadium, with the stadium project. I think the stadium project is the bit that makes Everton slightly more interesting than maybe, I don't know, sort of some other kind of, middle ranking Premier League club. There is a stadium that is well on the road to being finished. It's going to be a great stadium. That is clearly an asset. Everton have a rich history, big fan base, all those things. But lots of other clubs can sort of say similar things. I don't want to get into a big row about which club's bigger than other, but Everton are a storied club with lots of fans. Let's not forget though, they have faced 2 relegation battles in a row, and they're looking at a third. So that is already a discount. Any external investor will be looking at that as a discount, where there is a very real prospect of relegation in the next 3, 4, 5 years. So I have to sort of factor that in, the cost of getting out of the Championship again. But then, you just look at the debt. So, there's a small COVID-related loan from a bank called Metro Bank, which they're paying down. We'll call that 30 at the moment. Best part of 200 to rights and media. Okay, Mashiri writes his stuff off. So you've got sort of over 200 there. You've got ongoing losses, so it's so your funding losses going forward. That's something else they'd factor in. Massive need for Everton either get relegated, or you spend a lot of money to stop them being relegated. Yeah. So that's another thing you add to the cost. You've got this shortfall at Bramley Moor. Suddenly, these hundreds of millions are adding up, and you're thinking, well, where's how much is actually the whole enterprise worth? I mean, I will take on that debt and I will take on that spending. Off the top of my head there, I've done the best part of 500 million. Aren't we at about what we think Everton might be worth, particularly if it's a distressed asset, particularly if we know Farhad needs to sell? So this is would he sell the whole thing? Well, I think he's probably been thinking about that for 18 months, and he's had advisors in his head saying, oh, maybe we should sell. But what are we selling it for? We're selling a lot for £1. Yeah. We're selling a lot for 50, 100. How strong is my bargaining position here? Is it not better that I sell stakes, so at least I give myself some upside going forward if we can turn this ship around? So so my loss isn't 750 million, but in 5-10 years I start to sort of see some upside here, and maybe the next time we sell Everton, we sell it for £1 billion. I don't know, that sort of thing. That's the equation he's looking at here.
And finally, the issue with the Premier League and the financial issues that look set to be coming. How heavy can they be? I know people have spoken about maybe points deductions and things like that, but surely it'd be financial ahead of those issues coming along.
I honestly don't know, David. I know this is such a burning question for fans. So I have been less focused on this. I did a lot a year or so ago on it, but I've been just looking at other sort of takeovers. I've been more focused. I've been more focused on sort of Farhad and how he gets out of this than that. I mean, all I can say is, again, I'm sure you've done this on the pod before. The Premier League, if you look at their handbook and the way they sort of address these things, and Everton are a bit of a guinea pig here as well. They leave themselves huge amounts of leeway. First of all, it all goes off to an independent panel anyway. So the Premier League, take a back seat, and off it goes to, I think it's 3 very experienced jurists, lawyers, that sort of thing, and they'll have a good old look at this. But they have an enormous amount of discretion as to what they want to do. So yeah, you're right. They'll look at what's happened, the seriousness of it. what measures Everton took, how helpful Everton have been. Did they hold their hands up? Did they try and conceal it? Did they resist it? All of those things go into the mix, right, as aggravating or mitigating factors, like in any kind of judicial process, and all goes in the mix, and we get a result at the end. So could be financial, could be sporting, and then sporting could be points, could be embargoes, could be squad size rejections, all those sorts of things, right? I'd say all of that is on the table for Everton, and without wanting to prejudge it, I really don't want to prejudge it. I know it's a keenly argued point, and it will all hinge on Everton's case that COVID somehow uniquely hit them because they had so many sort of balls in the air, and that is why they blew the FFP parameters by such a huge margin. COVID killed the transfer market, which is why they couldn't trade their way out of trouble. Blah 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 blah. I think we've heard the arguments before. Do you, given everything we've just been talking about for the last 15 minutes, do you fine that club, that stroke company, given all their, what is that what they need, or do you hit them with sporting sanctions? From a sort of business point of view, are sporting sanctions, whilst actually catastrophic for football fans and will probably condemn you to relegation, are they actually more lenient than piling on more debt?
Yeah,
I think that's one to consider. Because as horrible as it sounds, particularly given Everton's unique history, what I use second longest run in the top flight.
Yeah,
you got the best in terms of total 120 years or something of your history in the top flight. I would argue that relegation is, of the sort of existential threats you're facing, that's not as bad as administration. So points penalty might be a result. Sorry to say, but who knows, right? Everton's going to go in there and argue their socks off and say, no, look, direction of travel, we were doing our best. All clubs were hit. We were trying to build a stadium. We made some mistakes, but we've rectified them. And COVID came along, and COVID sort of killed our kind of rescue, our strategy to get out of this mess. It might work.
Mate, thanks so much for this. Really, really interesting. Well, not so interesting as much as miserable for us as Everton.
Yeah, sorry about
that. I was going to say, mate, you'll have plenty of work to come as well, given what you've just outlined there. There could be on the horizon.
Yeah. I hope not. Because I don't wish clubs ill, but I do tend to do bad news. So
yeah. I'm sure I'll be messaging a few more times for the rest of this year, mate.